Faces of people he hadn't met yet, lives he hadn't lived yet, all swirling in that request. A vague, desperate wish to be kinder, to be braver, to not just go back to the same half-asleep drift. The offering. Fine, you can go back, but you can't take this with you. What happens to it? It'll wait. The sense of being split, not cleanly, not like cutting a string, but like pulling gum apart. A part of him stretching, stretching, and then snapping, one end flying back into the body on the table, the other remaining here, holding all the weight. The return. The slam back into flesh. The way air burned in his lungs. His mother's cry. The nurse's swearing joy. Someone saying his name over and over, as if calling him from another room. And behind it all, layered under every moment of his life since, a faint echo of a hallway and a closed door, and the knowledge that some part of him was still walking. The images settled. He was on his knees. He hadn't noticed falling. The floor was cold through his jeans. Hands, his own and not, rested on his shoulders. Easy, the other him murmured. Breathe, you know how. We practiced. Marcus laughed again, or tried to. It came out half sob. It's a lot, he managed. It always was, the other said. You were just smart enough to dodge it the first time. Was that a mistake? Marcus asked. Going back? The other considered. No, he said. I don't think anything that leads you to this exact moment can be classified that cleanly. You met people, you hurt some, you helped some, you moved into a house with very thin walls, you started listening, you're here now. That's the only metric that matters from my perspective. And now, the other said, I go, you stay. Full equipment this time, no missing parts, no deferred debt. That means, Marcus began. It means you're alive, the other said, with a kind of fierce gentleness. Fully. For however long you get, and when it's actually your time, you won't need a hall like this to process it. You'll already know the shape of it. You'll walk through whatever comes next with your eyes open. He stepped back. Light began to leak from his edges. Tell the house thank you, by the way, he said, for remembering what you couldn't. It could have just swallowed me and turned my outline into another stain on its basement wall. Instead, it decided to dream you back here. Why? Marcus asked. The other smiled. Because it's full of people like me, he said. Left behind deaths, unfinished endings. It's tired. It wants resolution. It wants its residents to match their echoes. You're the first one stubborn enough to make the trip. You won't be the last. He lifted a hand in a small, almost shy wave. Try to do something interesting with this, he said. It was very expensive. Then he stepped backward into the light and was gone. He was back in the basement. The corridor spat him out like a breath. One moment he was in the between room, knees on knot floor, lungs full of borrowed air. The next, he was back in the basement. Concrete under his knees, cold support column at his back, the bare bulb buzzing above. He sucked in a reflexive breath and nearly choked on the mingled smells, dust and damp and faint, fading antiseptic. The impressions in the walls were still there. The crowd of half people were not. The basement was just a basement again. The carved rectangle in the concrete, his hallway, had flattened, the bulge shrinking back into the wall until all that remained was the faint outline of a door that might have existed once. His name and number were still scratched at the base, but something about them felt hollow, like a slot with nothing left inside. He reached out and touched them. No tingle, no cold, just concrete. For the first time since the hospital room overlay, his head didn't feel like it was missing a floor. He knew, now. Not in the abstract, not in the mom said, I died for a few minutes sense. He remembered the decision, the bargaining, the splitting, the agreement. It sat in him like a new organ, heavy, integrating, painful and right. He stood slowly, legs trembling. Upstairs, the house creaked. It sounded, not lighter, exactly, but relieved somehow, like a joint finally popped back into place. He slept that night. When morning came, he woke up to sunlight on his face and a bird yelling outside his window and the distant sound of a garbage truck. For the first time since moving in, he'd made it through the night without jolting awake at 3:03. He rolled over, looked at the wall. The face was gone. Not painted over. He would have seen the brush strokes, the fresher shade. Just gone. The paint was still slightly uneven where the ridges had been, but the impression had relaxed, like clay that had been pressed and then left long enough to slump back toward smooth. The note was still taped there. Who are you dreaming about? Underneath, the answer had changed. You, it still said. But someone, something, had added a second line. Not anymore. He smiled. It felt strange on his face. Strange and honest. Thank you, he said softly, to the wall, to the beams, to whatever passed for the house's nerve system. The lamp did not flicker. The house did not groan. But somewhere in its bones, he felt a loosening, as if some tension that had been running through its frame for years had finally found a way to ground itself. Life didn't suddenly become easy. Full knowledge didn't come with a user manual. In the weeks that followed, Marcus found himself reacting to things differently. Crossing streets, he no longer had the unconscious invincibility of someone who'd never felt a bumper slide toward their ribs. He stopped at every light, checked both ways twice. He answered emails from friends he'd been ghosting. He called his mother more often. He quit jobs that were wasting his time and took ones that scared him a little because they meant trying. He also had nightmares. Remembered pain came with remembered fear. Some nights, he lay awake and listened to his own heart, counting beats, acutely aware that one day, at some random number he couldn't predict, it would stop for good. But the fear felt honest now. Not a formless dread sliding around his edges, a known quantity, a deadline, literally. He could work with that. The house settled around him. Its noises shifted, fewer sharp knocks, more contented creaks, the kind of sounds he imagined an old cat might make when it finally found a patch of sun that didn't move. He walked the basement sometimes, fingertips brushing the impressions in the walls. They were still there, still other people's left-behind deaths carved into concrete. But when he stood in the far corner and listened, he thought he heard something else under the silence. Not screams, not whispers. Breathing. Slow, steady, waiting. He couldn't help everyone, he knew. He wasn't that arrogant, but he understood the system now. He understood what the house was, a receiver, a subconscious, a junction box for deferred endings. He could at least make sure no one else stumbled into it blind the way he had. He started with his landlord, Kwan. She blinked at him across the small table in her cluttered office, squinting slightly over her reading glasses. You want me to? What? She said. Be more selective, he said. About who you rent it to, or at least be honest. Put in the listing that it's weird. Weird, she repeated. Thin, he tried. Leaky. Call it full of character if you want, but maybe don't rent it to someone who's fragile, or already grieving, or whatever the opposite of grounded is. They'll get pulled apart. Her mouth tightened. You think this is funny? She asked. You think I haven't had people break leases, move out after 2 months in the middle of the night? That's a mortgage payment every time. The house creaks too much? I don't like being watched. My husband dreams about stairs. They never use the same words, but it's always something. You think I don't know she's weird? Then say so, he said. That would scare people away. Some people need to be scared away, he said quietly. She studied him. You're still there, she pointed out. You haven't run screaming into a hotel like the last guy. I made a deal, he said, and I kept my end. I think He caught himself, surprised at the pronoun, and smiled. I think the house is grateful. That's the creepiest thing anyone's ever said in here, she muttered. But her eyes softened, just a hair. You're not wrong about her, though. She dreams, always has. My grandmother used to say the house remembers people better than people remember themselves. She's right, Marcus said. Was, the landlord corrected. She died in that house, you know. Top of the stairs. Heart just stopped. She was old. It was time. He thought about asking if anyone had carved her name in the basement. He thought better of it. Have you ever, he began, then shifted the question. Do you ever feel different when you're there? Like you're more yourself and less distracted? She shrugged one shoulder. Old houses don't let you forget they exist, she said. That's part of it. The pipes and the drafts and the way the floor complains when you cross it. They insist on your attention. You can't sleepwalk as easily. Yeah, he said. That sounds right. She sighed. I'll put something in the next listing, she said. Whenever that ends up being, not suitable for the squeamish. Or some such nonsense. You happy? I'm something, he said. She snorted. Welcome to adulthood, she said. You staying? He thought about it, about leaving, now that he knew. about finding a place with cleaner lines, thicker walls, about abandoning the impressions in the basement to collect more dust and more names. Yeah, he said. For a while, she and I have an understanding. She and you? And what, your ghosts? The landlord scoffed. Something like that, he said. Months later, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, Marcus woke from a doze he hadn't meant to fall into. Light poured through the back door. The yard was crusted with frost. His laptop screen had gone to sleep, saving him from the spreadsheet he'd been pretending to work on. He wasn't alone. A young woman stood in the doorway to the basement. Dark hair, dark eyes. Expression caught between curiosity and fear. She said, flushing when he looked up. Hi, sorry, I didn't mean to creep in. The landlord said you'd be here? I'm Elena. I'm moving in upstairs next month, if the background check doesn't, explode. She said you'd know what that means with the house, and she said if I had questions, I should ask you before I signed anything. He smiled. It came easier now. Yeah, he said. I know what it means. He glanced past her. The basement door gaped open behind her, shadows pooling down the stairs. From below, very faint, he thought he heard something like a sigh. Not unhappy, just waiting. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his legs, and picked up his notebook from where it lay beside the cold coffee. Come in, he said. Close the door. Let's talk about what she dreams. And whether you're the kind of person who wants to live in a house that remembers you better than you remember yourself. Elena stepped into the kitchen, closed the basement door gently, almost respectfully. The house settled around them. Above, a floorboard creaked. Not a warning, an acknowledgement, a hello. Marcus thought of the note still folded in his notebook. Who are you dreaming about? He knew now that the answer would never be simple or singular. The house would dream about everyone who passed through it. It would remember their deaths for them. It would whisper down the stairs when they forgot. He also knew that somewhere, at the end of a corridor that no longer needed a door, his own death was no longer waiting impatiently. It was with him, in every cautious step, every risk he actually took instead of just thinking about, every conversation he had with people like Elena who stood on the threshold of something weird and old and honest. He gestured to the chair across from his. She sat. So, she said, fingers worrying the seam of her sleeve. Is it haunted? He thought about hospital rooms and carved names and left behind deaths shaking themselves awake in the concrete. He thought about how death had once been something that happened to him in the dark, without his consent. He thought about how different it felt now to carry it in the light. It's aware, he said, and it dreams. And if you're not careful, it'll teach you how to be aware too. That sounds scary, she said. It is, he said. It's also useful. Depends what you want out of your life. She chewed her lip. What if I don't know yet? She asked. Then this might not be the worst place to figure it out, he said, as long as you're willing to listen when the house knocks. He tapped his pen against the notebook. Somewhere upstairs, very softly, something went tap. Tap, tap. Marcus smiled. The house dreamed on, and for the first time its dreams and his moved in the same direction. Not toward a forgotten death, but toward whatever came after. Awake and a little bit afraid, and absolutely, undeniably alive. All right, Kanka. Final Abutup iyice epic yapıyoruz bu. The House That Dreamed About You, Part 3, Final olsun. Yazı İngilizce, tek parça büyük final. The House That Dreamed About You. Part 3, The House That Learned How to Wake Up, Final, 6K style extended ending. The first time the house dreamed with him instead of about him, it happened in the middle of the day. That was new. Up until then, the rhythms had been predictable, or as predictable as anything involving haunted architecture and deferred deaths could be. Night was when the seams loosened. Night was when hospital corridors overlapped the hallway. Night was when knocks came in old patterns and paint rearranged itself into faces. Daytime had been normal, or normal adjacent. He could make coffee. He could answer emails. He could pretend for a few hours at a time to be just another man working from home in a creaky old rental with bad insulation and good light. Then noon came on a Tuesday, and the house exhaled. Marcus was halfway down the stairs with a mug in his hand when it happened. He'd heard Lisa once describe the feeling of an airplane losing a small bit of altitude, that tiny drop, when your stomach goes, "Hey, what was that?" but no one is screaming yet. It was that feeling, but sideways, like gravity had shifted angle by a degree. The mug tilted in his hand. The coffee didn't spill the way it should have. For a second, the dark surface hung at a slant, defying physics, clinging to the porcelain as if the world had forgotten which way down was supposed to be. The stair beneath his foot felt soft, not like rot soft, like memory soft. He froze, one hand gripping the banister. The house took another breath. Not air. He knew that now. Houses didn't breathe oxygen. They breathed attention, and right now this one was inhaling hard. The edges of the hallway blurred. The walls thickened, not physically, but in his perception. Paint deepened into something like fog compressed into a solid. The light from the window at the landing seemed to come from farther away, like he'd been dropped into the middle of a long tunnel. For a heartbeat, panic touched his spine. Then another realization came, a quieter one beneath the adrenaline. This didn't feel like the hospital overlay. It shared DNA with that first vision, but where the hospital had felt imposed on him, forced through, this felt invited. Like the house had knocked politely inside his skull first and only started shifting once he'd subconsciously maybe opened the door. "Okay," he said very softly to the stairwell. "If this is you, I'm listening." The house answered. Not with words, with a picture. The staircase dissolved. Not in chunks, not dramatically. One step at a time blurred, edges softening, then thinning, then vanishing. The banister under his hand became less wood and more suggestion. He wasn't falling. He wasn't standing either. He was just there, in a space that had no easy label. It was like that hall between again, his death corridor, but bigger, less personal, less keyed to his own fears and furniture. This place felt like an intersection. Layered over it, like images faintly projected onto fog, were flashes of interiors, a cramped kitchen with peeling yellow wallpaper, a wide entryway with black and white checkered tiles, a narrow hallway hung with religious icons, a living room filled with potted plants and old photographs. None of them were his. He felt them flicker across his awareness, then fade, like slides changed in an old projector. In their place, something else resolved, an outline, not of a person, of a structure, not one house, many. They floated around him in layers and scales, overlapping, like someone had taken hundreds of floor plans and stacked them transparency style. Different cultures, different eras, different sizes, farmhouses and city apartments and tenement blocks and suburban boxes and crooked Victorian monsters with too many gables. Their shapes glowed in faint lines of light. Between them, threads stretched like spider silk, some thick and pulsing, some hair-thin, a network, a nervous system. He felt it before he understood it. The realization hit with the inevitable snap of puzzle pieces finally forced into place. It wasn't just his house that dreamed. Of course it wasn't. Old buildings all over the world had that same hum, those same soft places in the walls, those same stories of weird noises and bad dreams, and this place just feels off. He was seeing them now, all of them, or at least the ones that had learned how to dream properly. "Whoa," he breathed. His voice didn't echo. It simply appeared in the space and then sank into the tangled web of house shapes and thread lines like rain soaking into soil. Somewhere in that web, a familiar outline brightened. His house. He recognized the staircase, the curve of the kitchen wall, the slight bow of a support beam in the basement. Its shape pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. "Hey," he thought, without speaking. The familiar outline warmed. It felt, absurdly, like being nudged by a shoulder you knew. "You brought me here," he said. "Why?" One of the threads between structures thickened. He felt information traveling along it, a pulse of meaning that wasn't words exactly, but carried intention. His head filled with impressions, glimpses. A brick row house in Philadelphia, its basement walls damp and crowded with the impressions of people who'd passed through decades of tenants. A farmhouse in rural Poland, its beams darkened by smoke, its kitchen table worn smooth by elbows, its attic heavy with unspoken grief. A ryokan in Japan, where the tatami mats had memorized the footsteps of generations, and the paper walls could describe the shape of every guest's loneliness. Each one of these houses felt like his. In the same way different people could both be introverts or both be sharp-tongued, These houses all shared a quality. They were thin, not weak, not broken, porous, able to hold impressions more vividly than thicker, newer constructions. Able to remember, able to dream. Somewhere, a thread pulsed again, harder this time. The impressions focused. He saw a woman in her 60s, sitting alone at a kitchen table, staring at her hands as if trying to remember something she'd forgotten on purpose. A teenager lying awake in an attic bedroom, listening to the creak of floorboards and feeling like if he just turned his head fast enough, he'd catch someone standing in the doorway. A man in a wheelchair in a small ground-floor apartment, eyes fixed on a corner of peeling plaster where he swore he saw the outline of someone lean and whisper his name at night. Different countries, different languages, same expression. That look Marcus knew from his own mirror now, the look of someone on the edge of remembering their unsent death, left behind pieces, waiting. The house pulsed again against his awareness. He felt the meaning. Not words, but he could have translated it into three. Not just you. His throat tightened. How many? He whispered. The web responded. The answer was not a number. It was a weight. He felt decades, centuries of sidestepped endings. People who'd coded, bargained, been pulled back, then dropped their death in a hallway like a suitcase they never picked up. Some had left pieces in hospitals, some in cars, some in living rooms, some in war zones. Wherever the agreement had been struck, you go back, but this stays. The leftover had needed somewhere to go. Places like his house served as storage. Not just one house per soul. Houses echoed multiple people. People were echoed by multiple houses. Death, it turned out, was not a local event. It left a residue that could resonate across oceans. His house pushed another impression at him, more urgent, more focused. He was back in his own basement, not the present one. A memory seen from a new angle. There was the carved name, Marcus Chen. Only this time he saw more. Other names nearby, so faded he hadn't noticed them with his ordinary eyes. Kyungju Park, A. Delgado, Enkeld, all of them. Dozens more, slipping into illegibility, overlapping, written in different hands, languages, scripts, no dates, just names and numbers. He'd been one of many. The house had held all of them. It had gotten tired. It had reached for the one stubborn enough to come get his. Now it was showing him the others, as if to say, see? As if to say, you know how. Marcus's gut hollowed. No, he said on instinct. No, absolutely not. I barely survived doing it once. The web hummed. Not persuasion, not pressure, just fact. Images flooded him. Not the whole process. That would have killed him outright. Just the pattern. If you could walk your own hall between, you could learn to walk beside someone else in theirs. Not to drag them where they didn't want to go. Not to crack open doors before their hands reached for the handle. But to be there, to point to the door, gently, when their own house started pressing it into their dreams. To say the thing no one had said to him, yes, you died. Briefly. It mattered. It left a mark. You don't have to be frightened of that mark forever. That's all this is. He felt, in the space where his death now lived, integrated and humming quietly, the shape of the thing the house was suggesting. They wanted him to do for others what he'd done for himself. Not all of them. Not every name on every basement wall in every thin house. That would have been impossible. But some. Enough. Like pressure valves, like keystones. Pick the right ones, and a whole run of others would settle easier. Focus on those whose deferred deaths were so loud they distorted everything they touched. The house pushed another impression at him, a future, not fixed, but possible. A woman, Elena, maybe, sitting where he had sat months ago, at the kitchen table, her face pale, hands wrapped around a mug like a lifeline. So there's this house, he would say, and sometimes it dreams about the part of you that stayed behind. I can walk you to the door, if you want. He saw himself standing in strangers' basements, tracing names on walls that weren't his, feeling for threads, following them down. He saw older houses, older than his, exhaling with something like gratitude as a particularly loud echo finally went quiet. He saw some people saying no, slamming their inner doors. He saw others stepping through. He saw new left-behind deaths being carved because the system wasn't broken. People would still bargain, still be sent back lighter with a little less than they went in with. This wasn't about ending the practice. It was about offering an upgrade, a patch, a way, for those who could bear it, to one day go back and claim what they left. His chest hurt. He realized he was crying, tears floating oddly in this in-between without actually falling. "You want me to be?" He laughed wetly. "What? A part-time psychopomp? A freelance death integration consultant?" If the house had had shoulders, he would have sworn it shrugged. He felt one more thing in the pulsing web, a softer, more private thread between him and his own outline. It carried not a demand, not a job posting, but a question, clear and simple, like the first note he'd taped to the wall. "Will you?" He could say no. He knew that. The corridor had taught him that much. There were no guaranteed paths, only contexts and pressures and habits and choices. He could keep living quietly. He could keep helping just the people who happened to wander into this thin place. He could let the others stay foggy, let their houses keep dreaming around them until someone else, someday, figured out another way. No one would punish him. No cosmic being would descend and revoke his reintegrated death. He had already paid his main debt. This was extra. A call, not a sentence. He thought of Elena, though, of the way she'd stood in the basement doorway, curious and scared. He thought of his mother's shoulders at the foot of his hospital bed. He thought of himself at 19, arguing with whatever had been on call that day, too stubborn to go where he was supposed to go. He thought of the car horn and the impact and the sudden absence of body and the hallway and the offer and the split. He thought of the 15 years he'd lived half asleep because he hadn't been ready to know how close it had been. He thought of how much clearer everything felt now that he did. He thought of all the people walking around with that same half-absence humming in their bones, with houses like his pressing their losses into the walls, waiting for someone who understood to knock back. His answer surprised him with how quickly it came. He didn't have to dig for it. He didn't even have to phrase it. He just felt it, and the web lit up along the lines tying him to his house. Yes, the light in the in-between space brightened, just a fraction. Not triumph. Relief. The outlines of the other houses pulsed. Some flared briefly, like porch lights flicked on in acknowledgement. Others remained dormant, waiting. His own house brightened most. A warmth rushed up his spine, like someone had opened a vent between his brain and the foundations. The staircase came back under his feet. The mug in his hand righted. Coffee sloshed perilously close to the rim, then settled. He was standing on the stairs again. The whole experience had taken no time at all, from the house's perspective. The clock on the wall in the living room, visible through the railing, had ticked forward 60 seconds. He let out a shaky breath. "Okay," he said. His voice sounded very small in the ordinary air. "You win. We'll do it your way." A board creaked overhead, not a protest. Acknowledgement, acceptance of a deal, partnership, whether he'd meant it that way or not. If you'd asked him, at 19, what he wanted to do with his life, he would have given you some vague answer about figuring it out. He used that line for years. After the corridor, figuring it out looked different. It looked like laminated psychology books and neurology articles pulled up on his laptop between freelance gigs, trying to map what he now knew onto frameworks other people could accept. It looked like support groups and forums, anonymous posts at 2 in the morning from people saying, "I died once, and I don't remember anything, but I can't stop thinking about it. And ever since the accident, I feel like I left something behind, and my house won't shut up about the corner where my grandfather died. Is that normal?" He didn't respond to all of them. He wasn't ready to be a beacon that bright. Not yet. He practiced on Elena first. Her left-behind death was small, comparatively. Not a corridor, but a threshold. A fever when she was 10. A high one. The kind that made parents sit in hard chairs all night listening for the rhythm of their kids' breathing. It wasn't even hers, technically. Her brother had been the one who flatlined in the hospital while she was in the next room, half delirious. He hadn't come back. She had. Her guilt had. The house in her childhood had absorbed most of the echo. This new one had picked it up when she moved in, the way a strong magnet messed with a weaker one's filings. The process with her was gentler, shorter. He didn't have to walk a whole hall between. He just had to stand with her in the kitchen as she described the dream about 2 hospital beds and one going empty, and then watch her face as he said, "Yeah, that wasn't just a dream. You were there. You felt him go. That's why your house keeps showing you your brother's face in the window. It's not haunted the way horror movies say. It just remembers. And so do you. You're allowed to, she cried. He did too for a while. Then they went downstairs and looked at the basement wall together. Her name wasn't there. Her brother's initials were. They traced them with their fingers. In the weeks that followed, her nightmares softened. The house creaked less in that strange midnight rhythm. The face in the stairwell shadow stopped turning toward her and just became a patch of darker paint. Small patch. First patch. Soon, word spread, not through billboards or big declarations, through the sideways channels that stories like this always preferred. A neighbor who knew a guy who was good with old houses. A cousin who swore the weird place they'd moved into finally stopped knocking every night after a conversation and a walk downstairs. An online stranger in a near-death experience forum who mentioned a man in Portland who had once said, casually, that houses can hold your death for you if you let them. And the words had stuck in half a dozen minds. He didn't call himself anything. He didn't start a business. He didn't charge money, other than asking for train fare sometimes when the web tugged his attention toward a town that wasn't his. The work came to him. The house helped. Some nights he would find he'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table and woken in the in-between again, web glowing, a particular thread throbbing insistently. He'd trace it, not with his hands, but with his attention, and see a little clearer this time. A tired man in his 50s in a brick house in Chicago, staring at the imprint of a hand on the basement wall that only showed up when the light flickered. A young mother in Lisbon, too exhausted to sleep, hearing someone jangle the doorknob of a room that had been sealed since the old woman who used to live there died. An elderly father in Seoul, walking the same 3 steps in his living room every night at 2 a.m., because that's where his son's heart monitor had stopped all those years ago. He couldn't help all of them. He knew that. Some threads were faint, better left to local solutions, a priest's blessing, a repainting, a family finally selling a house that had grown too heavy. But some glowed like emergency lights in the fog. Those he followed. Sometimes physically, sometimes in that between place, walking hallways that weren't his, talking to left-behind deaths that didn't belong to his face but recognized his pattern. Some were reluctant to go. Some had sat so long in their niche in the wall that leaving felt scarier than staying. He never pushed. He only offered, showed them the door that belonged to them, reminded them why they had bargained in the first place. Their living half had insisted it wasn't done yet. Often, that was enough. The more he did it, the easier it became, not because his heart toughened, but because he recognized the texture of the work. Like any skill, the first time you change a bandage, your hands shake. By the 50th, you know where the gauze sticks and how to speak in that steady, low voice that makes pain feel less alone. He became good at it. He never stopped being scared, exactly. But he stopped being surprised by the shapes grief and fear and unfinishedness took. His own house changed with him. Once a month, he still walked the basement. The impressions on the walls shifted subtly over time. Some grew fainter, as their matches elsewhere in the world finally opened doors and moved on. Some deepened, new arrivals pressing their outlines into the concrete. His name remained. Marcus Chen. The slot behind it was empty. He liked it that way. It reminded him that he was living on borrowed time he had fully agreed to borrow. It made him careful. Not fragile, careful. Intentional. He crossed streets differently now. He answered calls he would have ignored. He took jobs that scared him a little in the right way. He also let himself rest sometimes, without guilt. You couldn't live at full symbolic intensity every minute. Even psychopomps needed to do laundry. The first time someone came to him with a story that didn't fit the pattern at all, it was a man named Daniel. He was tall, mid-30s, with the kind of tightly wound energy that made chairs nervous. He tapped his foot constantly, as if convinced the floor would vanish if he didn't keep testing it. "It's not me," Daniel said, on the 3rd cup of coffee at Marcus's kitchen table. "I mean, maybe it's me also, but it started with the house before I even moved in." Marcus listened. The house listened, too. Sometimes he could feel it paying attention when a story hit one of its favorite chords. You bought it recently? Marcus prompted. Inherited, Daniel said. Technically. Well, he grimaced. Technically, it was left to my father. He wanted nothing to do with it, so it passed to me. Great-uncle's place. Old, weird, full of crap. Family legend says it got into people's heads. Did you move in? Not right away, he said, but I went to clear it out. That's when the dream started. The baseline of his story was familiar. Corridors, rooms that didn't match the physical layout, his arms sinking into a wall like it was thick smoke. At first, Marcus assumed another thin place, another house like his, full of left-behind deaths, waking up because someone with compatible fractures had stepped inside. Then Daniel mentioned the trunk. It was in the attic, he said, locked, heavy as hell. I almost left it, but in the dream, I kept seeing this trunk. Same one, same scuffs, so I dragged it down, pried it open. What was inside? Marcus asked. Not what, Daniel said. Who? Marcus went very still. In all his work so far, he'd never heard anyone say that. Meaning, he asked carefully. Meaning there was something in there, Daniel said. Not a body, not bones, paper, journals, drawings, hundreds of pages of one person trying to map their dreams, floor plans of places that weren't real, names of people they'd only ever met in sleep, descriptions of houses all over the world, specific houses, addresses, connected by corridors, like yours. He looked up, eyes sharp, like the one you've been walking. Marcus's fingers tightened on his mug. The house thrummed around them. He could feel it. Boards, beams, concrete, all pulling fractionally tighter, like an animal perking up its ears. Who was the dreamer? He asked quietly. My great-uncle, Daniel said. At least I think it was. The dates line up with when he lived there, and the handwriting matches letters we found. He'd been working on it for decades. He never left town, but somehow he knew what the houses in Seoul and Lisbon and Chicago looked like inside. And then he died, Marcus said. In the house, Daniel nodded. Top of the stairs. Same as your landlord's grandmother. Heart attack, they said. He'd been odd the last few years. Aggressive. Paranoid. Said they were following him into the waking world. You can see why my father wanted nothing to do with the place. Marcus sat back. Pieces shifted. He thought of the network he'd seen in the between space. Of how big it was. Big enough that he hadn't even wondered if anyone else had seen it before him. Of course someone had. Of course someone else had walked these halls, noticed patterns, tried to write them down. What do you see now when you dream? Marcus asked. Daniel's jaw flexed. That's the thing, he said. At first, it was just corridors, rooms that didn't belong to me. I'd wake up thinking about someone else's kitchen, someone else's basement. Normal for your sort of thing, right? Marcus nodded slowly. Then it changed, Daniel said. Now, they're not just rooms. There are people in them, but they're not left behind deaths like you described. They're awake. They know they're in a dream, and they're looking for doors. They're trying to get out. He swallowed. Some of them say your name. The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Marcus's heart beat loud in his ears. The house creaked once overhead. Not random. That particular, deep, weight-bearing creak that always meant it was paying very close attention. Say that again, Marcus said. Some of the people in my dreams, Daniel repeated slowly, say they're looking for the man who belongs to the house that knows itself. One woman called you the one who took his death back. A kid called you the Death Walker. Someone else said the House Whisperer, which sounds like a crappy reality TV show, but you get the idea. He tried to smile. It didn't land. Whatever you've been doing, he said, it's echoing. Out there, in whatever space this is, and my great-uncle spent his life mapping it, and now his dreams are stuck in the trunk, and I think I've opened it. The house hummed. Marcus exhaled. Okay, he said. So, there's a whole layer beyond left-behind deaths. Dreamwalkers, cartographers, people like your uncle, people like me now, I guess. And they want something from you, Daniel said. Not just help finishing their deaths. They're trying to get to you, to this house. They say it's safe, or safer than where they are. Marcus rubbed the bridge of his nose. A headache pulsed behind his eyes. I wanted to help people sleep better, he muttered. Not become a relay station for a lost network of dream architects. Too late, the house said. Not in words. But the denial flickered in its bones anyway. You started this. He couldn't disagree. He'd healed his own loop. He'd helped others. He'd taught houses to let go of echoes more cleanly, Of course the system would adapt. Of course other players would step into the space he'd inadvertently cleared. He'd removed some of the static. Now other signals could come through. "Can I see the journals?" Marcus asked. He knew the answer before he finished the sentence. He'd have gone anyway. The uncle's house was 3 hours away, smaller than his, but similar in the ways that mattered. Sagging in the center like an old man. Windows that reflected back slightly wrong images when the sun hit at just the right angle. A front door that stuck halfway, as if something in the jamb didn't love letting go. The attic was reachable only by a narrow folding ladder. Marcus climbed up into dust and decades. The trunk sat under the small window, as if it were a pet sunning itself. Up close, it was older than he'd expected. Real wood, not plywood. Metal bands gone dull with oxidation. 3 padlocks, all open now, their loops hanging limp. Inside, the journals smelled like paper that had absorbed too many nights. He opened one at random. The handwriting was meticulous. Tiny, cramped letters, each one precise as if written with measured breaths. Navthur woke in the narrow hall again. Doors marked 17-19-23. Floor cold. No sound. At the end of the hall, light behind a door marked not yet. When I touched it, felt a shock up my arm. Woke with wrist numb. House creaking. Something in the wall behind the stove. Page after page like that. Dates. Descriptions. Sketches of floor plans, arrows between them. Notes asking, why do some doors repeat? Why do some houses know each other? And is this all one house, or many that share a skeleton? "Your uncle was thorough," Marcus said. Daniel stood awkwardly in the corner, as if afraid to touch anything. "He got obsessed," he said. "Stopped going to work, stopped eating properly, spent all his time up here. My father used to say, your uncle lives more in his dreams than his life." He hesitated. "When he died," he added, "they found him on the stairs back, but my grandmother said she heard him talking to someone at the top of the house the night before. Not on the phone. She said she thought he was arguing with himself, or with the house." Marcus ran a finger down a page. His skin tingled faintly where the ink had sunk deep. One phrase, underlined 3 times, jumped out at him. "There is a mind behind the walls." Not just houses with impressions, not just death halls woven together. Something else. Something that had learned, long before Marcus ever walked his first corridor, to use the network. He felt the web pulse around him. His own house, miles away, nudged his attention. Threads vibrated. He closed his eyes. Let the attic blur. Let the smell of dust and old paper dim. The between space opened. The network glowed. And this time he saw something he hadn't noticed before. Not outlines of houses, not just the threads. In between them, in the spaces where no building lines were drawn, he saw eyes. Not literal ones. Points of awareness. Knots in the web where attention had condensed. Some small, some vast. All of them watching. Some turned toward him when he looked. One, larger than the others, pulsed slowly. Ancient. Familiar. The thing he'd already met and healed once. The original entity that had poisoned itself on human consciousness for 6,000 years and then let him help it undo the damage. It watched, not interfering, just present. Around it, newer knots glimmered. Smaller predators, smaller archivists, smaller experimenters. Some curious, some hungry, some wary. One of them, off to the side, connected by a thicker-than-average thread to Daniel's uncle's house outline, brightened when Marcus's awareness brushed it. He saw flashes. The uncle, younger, standing at a kitchen counter, hands braced, eyes closed, sweat on his brow. The outline of a door on the wall behind the stove, faint as a shadow, pulsing. Whispers. A bargain. "Show me more," the uncle was saying. "Let me walk farther. Let me see all of it. I'll map it for you. I'll write it down. I'll keep it." Normal near-death deals were simple. Send me back. Take my death. This had been different. This had been, let me stay partly there, partly here, longer than I'm supposed to, and I'll be your archive. The knot on the web, a small entity, not the original, not as powerful, but clever, had agreed. It had used the uncle as a lens, a scout, a desk worker in a universe made of hallways. For years, he'd wandered corridors and written down what he'd seen, feeding the thing between the walls with maps. Then he'd grown older. His body had worn out. The strain of half-being in the between place had taken its toll. He died in his staircase. His death had split just like Marcus's. Only in this case, the piece that stayed behind wasn't just a simple left-behind death. It was a job, untethered now. The trunk had become its anchor. For decades, it had sat, waiting for someone to open the lid and invite it back into circulation. Now someone had, and that someone was standing awkwardly in the attic, shifting his weight from foot to foot, chewing his thumbnail. "Is it bad?" Daniel asked when Marcus opened his eyes. Marcus thought about lying. Then he remembered the corridor and the door and what owning your death had felt like. "It's complicated," he said. "Your uncle made a deal. Not with the same entity I did, with another one, smaller, more focused. It used him to map the network. Now that he's gone, what's left of that relationship is in these pages. And when you opened the trunk, you tuned yourself to it." "Is that why they're talking to me?" Daniel asked. "The ones in the dreams?" "I think so," Marcus said. "Part of your uncle still works as a switchboard operator between houses. You've inherited the desk." Daniel grimaced. "Can I quit?" he asked. "Eventually," Marcus said. "But if you slam the door, burn the journals, move, refuse to listen, you won't just be stepping away. You'll be breaking a line those people out there are following. They're not all like the left-behind deaths I deal with. Some are researchers, architects, people who figured out how to cross without dying first. They've been relying on your uncle as a constant. If you drop it all at once, things could get chaotic." Daniel stared at him. "Do you hear yourself?" he asked. "You just told me I inherited my great-uncle's dream job, literally, and that if I don't clock in, I cause chaos in some kind of Hall of Mirrors underworld." "Hall between," Marcus corrected automatically. "Not better," Daniel snapped. Marcus held up a hand. "I get that you didn't sign up for this," he said. "Neither did I, really. I mean, I did, but I didn't know what I was agreeing to at 19. I just didn't want to die yet. This stuff," he gestured at the journals, "tends to attach to people who are bad at letting things end, or good at it, depending on your definition." Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. It sounded like the air leaking out of a balloon that had been overinflated for years. "What do I do?" he asked. "Short term," Marcus said. "We make sure nothing else is bound to you that you didn't consent to. I can walk you down your own hall if there is one. See if you left anything behind. See if whatever your uncle was working with tried to hitch a ride." "And long term?" Daniel asked. "Long term." Marcus looked at the trunk, at the journals, at the edges of the attic, where the dust seemed to thicken in patterns that weren't random. "Long term," he said slowly, "we figure out how to turn this from a parasitic relationship into something healthier. For you, for the houses, for the people they talk to. Your uncle did important work, even if it broke him. Maybe it doesn't have to break you. Maybe it can just stretch you." Daniel stared. "Do you ever get tired of being the one who says, 'Maybe we can fix this'?" he asked. "All the time," Marcus said. "Doesn't mean I'm wrong." The house around them creaked. Not just Daniel's uncle's house, Marcus's house, other houses far away along the web. He could feel their attention. Curious, cautious, hopeful. Not for him, for themselves. Old structures who'd been drafted as subconscious storage, getting the faint sense that maybe, just maybe, the humans who wandered their halls were finally starting to catch up. Not his uncle. Weeks later, back in his own kitchen, Marcus sat at the table with his notebook open and 3 separate pens uncapped. He'd adopted his uncle's habit. Not his uncle, Daniel's. The journals in the trunk had shown him something important. You couldn't trust your brain to hold on to the shape of the network on its own. It blurred. It flattened. It turned multi-dimensional connections into bad metaphors. But if you wrote down enough pieces, enough intersections, enough names and doors and odd recurring houses, patterns emerged. You had to respect the work. You had to treat the dreaming universe like a subject worth studying, not just fearing. His notes now spanned 3 notebooks. One for houses and their quirks. One for people and their left-behind deaths. One for the entities in the walls, the knots of awareness that had learned to use the web long before humans knew what they were walking in. Some were benign. Some were curious. Some were still dangerously hungry. The original entity, the big one he'd helped heal indirectly through the mirror story that had been someone else's nightmare in another city, remained, watching. Sometimes, in the shallow hours between 3 and 4 a.m., he felt it like a kind eye at the edge of his dream, making sure the smaller predators didn't take too much. It had chosen to stop hunting. It hadn't sworn to stop observing. He was weirdly comforted by its gaze. It reminded him that even old mistakes could be mended, given enough time and one stubborn human idiot who refused to accept binary choices. He wanted to be that idiot consistently. He also, on a much more mundane level, wanted to remember to buy groceries before the house decided to trap him in a symbolic corridor about scarcity. He flipped his notebook to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote, in block letters, "Things I know," for underneath. He listed 1. People die and sometimes come back. 2. When they don't remember, it's because someone stays behind to hold the death. 3. Houses can hold those left behind pieces. Thin ones do it best. 4. Those pieces don't like being forgotten forever. 5. Helping them return makes houses quieter and people more alive. 6. The network of houses is old and vast and has been mapped by others before me. 7. Some entities use that network. Not all are malicious. Some are just bad at ethics. 8. Deals made in panic are seldom well thought out. 9. Death is not a bug in the system. It's part of the design. 10. Ignoring your death doesn't make it go away. It just makes it leak. He underlined that last one twice. At the bottom of the page, after a pause, he added, 11. Old houses want to help if we let them. He stopped, looked around. The kitchen ceiling had water stains in one corner that looked like continents. The fridge hummed. The basement door stood closed, its knob a small, solid circle of reality in the room. So do I, he added softly, not to the notebook. And I'm trying. The house creaked above him, warm, acknowledging. Somewhere far away, through the network, other houses creaked back, faint echoes of the same rhythm. The world was full of places that had been waiting a long time for people to listen properly. He didn't know how many he'd get to in his lifetime. He didn't know how his own final corridor would look when it finally came. He only knew this. When it did, he wouldn't be surprised. He wouldn't feel cheated. He wouldn't have to run down the hall yelling, "I'm not ready." He would, if he was lucky, turn to whatever waited at the end, nod, and say, "I know, I've been rehearsing." And some old house, somewhere, would sigh in its beams and mark one less name on its wall. Her Persker. Years from now, long after Elena had moved out and raised children who'd grow up thinking old houses just creak like that. Long after Daniel had turned his great-uncle's maps into something like an operating manual for dreaming safely. Long after Marcus's landlord had finally retired and sold that weird property to someone who saw it not as a burden but a rare instrument, the house would still stand. Paint would chip, roofs would be patched, new appliances would hum where old ones rattled. People would come and go. Some would feel watched and leave. Some would feel held and stay. The house would still dream, but it would do so differently now. Not as a confused subconscious packed full of other people's unfinished endings, as a partner, a collaborator, in the strange work of helping fragile, time-bound creatures remember that there was more to them than the years they got on paper. It would still sometimes press the faint imprint of a face into fresh paint. Not to torment, to invite. It would still creak 3 times at 3 a.m. in certain winters, its boards cold and honest. Not to scare, to knock. And sometimes, somewhere in the in-between, in the web of house shapes and dream corridors, if you were unlucky enough, or lucky enough, to wander far enough while your body lay in a hospital bed, or a crashed car, or on the tiles of your kitchen floor, you might meet a man. He would look ordinary, a bit tired, eyes kind in that way that comes only from having seen more than he wanted to, and deciding, deliberately, not to flinch. "Hi," he would say, if you grabbed his sleeve in the hallway and demanded to know where the hell you were. This is the part between. Don't panic. You've got options. He wouldn't push you. He wouldn't promise outcomes he couldn't guarantee. He would, if you insisted on going back, help you make the cleanest deal you could. If you begged to stay, he would look into the light with you and say quietly, "Okay, then let's walk." Either way, he wouldn't leave you alone in the hall. He'd had his own once. He remembered what the silence had felt like. The house that dreamed about him once had made sure he never forgot. And so the man who had taken his death back and learned how to give others theirs did the work humans always seemed surprised to discover they were capable of. He stayed. He listened. He knocked. He answered when houses called. He helped endings line up with their lives, and somewhere back on a street in Portland, a house with good light and bad insulation, and a basement scratched with names creaked in its sleep, content. It had done its job. It would keep doing it. Because that was the nature of houses. They remembered. They held. They dreamed. And if you were paying attention, if you stopped in the stairwell or at the kitchen table or with your hand on a basement wall and listened very carefully, you might hear it under the sounds of pipes and wind and settling wood. Not words, not even thoughts, just a feeling. Old and patient and quietly, fiercely protective. Like a hand on the small of your back in the dark, steering you gently toward the door you'd forgotten you'd asked for. The house that dreamed about you. The end, for now,